The Grand Chamber was the largest room ever built by any species in the galaxy. It floated in the middle of a dead star system, a station so old that nobody remembered who made it first. 42 species sent their representatives here, 42 voices, 42 seats arranged in a great circle, each one lit from above by a cold white light. Hana sat in the smallest seat. It was placed at the very edge of the circle, far from the center, almost hidden in shadow. This was humanity's seat. They had held it for 97 years, and in all that time, nobody had bothered to give them a better one. She did not mind. She had never minded. Hana was a small woman with dark hair pulled back tight. She wore a plain gray suit, no medals, no decorations. In her hands she held a datapad, and she scrolled through old notes slowly, like a student reading before an exam she already knew she would pass. Hundreds of alien delegates spoke in their own languages, their translators humming and clicking. The air smelled like metal and something sweet that Hana had never been able to name. Today was different. She could feel it. The Rivari delegation had arrived early, which they never did. The Olmari warriors stood along the walls instead of sitting, their thick arms crossed over their armored chests. Even the Fendul, who usually floated calmly in their water tanks or pressing against the glass, their pale eyes watching everything. The Rivari High Speaker rose from his seat at the center of the chamber. He was tall, taller than any human, with a narrow head and black eyes that reflected the light like polished stone. His voice was deep and carried easily through the room without any need for amplification. He spoke for a long time. Hana listened to every word through her translator, but she already knew what he was going to say. Yuna had intercepted the draft of this speech 11 weeks ago and sent it to her in a coded message hidden inside a food shipment report. The speech was about humanity. It was always about humanity these days. The High Speaker talked about how humans expanded too fast. He said they bred without control and refused to submit their genetic records to the Council's Population Bureau. He called them unpredictable. He called them dangerous. He said their culture was chaotic, and that their presence in the galaxy was like a disease spreading through a healthy body. Hana did not react. She kept scrolling through her datapad. One by one, other species stood to support the High Speaker. The Olmari war chief pounded his fist against his chest and said his soldiers were ready. A Fendul elder sent a psychic pulse through the chamber that made several delegates shiver, a wordless message of agreement that bypassed language entirely. Smaller species, ones that usually stayed quiet, stood and nodded because they were too afraid to do anything else. Hana watched them all. She noted which ones spoke with real anger and which ones spoke with fear. She had files on every single delegate in this room. She knew their habits, their secrets, their weaknesses. Yuna's network had been thorough. The vote was called. The High Speaker asked each species to cast their decision on whether humanity should be declared a Class 7 existential threat. This was not a small thing. Class 7 meant extermination-level force was authorized. It meant fleets would be sent. It meant colonies would burn. The votes came in. 39 in favor, 3 against. The 3 who voted no were minor species who had their own reasons to distrust the Council, but they were too small to matter. Every eye, every sensor, every telepathic mind in the room turned toward the small seat at the edge where Hana sat. They expected her to cry, or beg, or make a desperate speech about peace and cooperation and the value of all living things. That was what weak species did when the Council turned against them. Hana had watched it happen twice before during her time here. Both of those species no longer existed. Hana closed her datapad. She placed it carefully on her seat. She stood up, and even though she was shorter than almost everyone in the room, something about the way she moved made the nearest delegates lean back. She looked at the High Speaker. She looked at the Olmari war chief. She looked at the Fenduel elders in their tanks. She looked at all 39 species that had just voted to kill every man, woman, and child of her kind. And she smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not a brave smile. It was the smile of someone who had been sitting at a card table for a very long time, waiting for the other players to finally push all their chips to the center. Finally, she said. Her voice was quiet, but her translator carried it to every corner of the chamber. The word hung in the air like smoke. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The high speaker's black eyes blinked once, twice. He had prepared responses for every possible human reaction. Anger, tears, threats, pleas. He had not prepared for this. Hana bowed politely, the way humans did when they were leaving a formal gathering. Then she turned and walked toward the exit. Her shoes clicked against the metal floor, and each step echoed through the silent chamber like a countdown. She did not look back. In the corridor outside, the doors sealed behind her with a heavy sound. The air was cooler here and quieter. Hana reached into her pocket and pulled out a small communicator. She pressed it once. Teho, she said. It's time. Wake up the fleet. There was a brief pause. Then her brother's voice came through, calm and steady like he was talking about the weather. It's been awake for 11 years, Hana. She closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about a drainage pipe on a colony world called Ryon 4. She thought about the sound of screaming that lasted 3 days. She thought about a little boy holding her hand in the dark, telling her not to make any noise. She opened her eyes. Good, she said. Then let's begin. She put the communicator away and walked down the corridor toward her ship. Behind her, through the thick walls of the station, she could hear the muffled sound of 42 species beginning to panic. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. The council moved fast. Faster than most species expected, but exactly as fast as Hana had predicted. Within 6 days of the vote, the combined Accord Armada assembled at the border of human space. 12,000 warships from 6 species, arranged in a formation so large it could be seen from nearby planets as a second sun. The Almari war chief stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the star charts. Human space was small compared to the rest of the galaxy. 1 star, a handful of colonies, a thin spread of stations and outposts. He had crushed larger civilizations with a quarter of this fleet. He gave the order to advance. Back on Earth, in a room buried deep beneath a mountain, Yuna stood in front of a wall of screens and watched 12,000 red dots cross into human territory. She was a thin woman with sharp eyes and gray hair that she kept short. She had not slept in 2 days. She looked like someone watching a plan come together. They're taking the northern corridor, she said to the officer beside her. Exactly as we modeled. The officer looked nervous. All 12,000? All 12,000. Yuna almost smiled. They didn't even send scouts ahead. They think we're hiding behind Earth with everything we have. She pressed a button on her console. A secure channel opened to every human command ship in the solar system. All units, this is network. The guests have arrived. Stay quiet. Stay dark. Wait for the signal. Across the asteroid belt, 700 human warships sat in complete silence. Their engines were cold. Their systems were powered down to the minimum. From the outside, they looked like rocks. That was the point. Du-Yun had spent 20 years making them look like rocks. He stood on the bridge of one of these hidden ships, a man with round glasses and ink stains on his fingers, who looked more like a teacher than a weapons designer. Around him the crew waited in the dark, breathing slowly, watching the Council Armada pass overhead through passive sensors only. Project Ember was Du-Yun's life work. The Council knew that humans built ships. They knew about Earth's orbital defense platforms. They had spied on those things and measured them, and decided they were not impressive. What they did not know about were the asteroids. For 30 years, human engineers had been hollowing out asteroids across the belt. They installed engines inside them, silent ones, that ran on a fuel the Council had never seen, because Duyun invented it himself. They filled them with kinetic kill vehicles, missiles that carried no explosives but moved so fast that they did not need any. They built drone swarms, thousands of small machines that could think for themselves and adapt to any enemy formation. They wrapped everything in a coating that absorbed every scan the Council used. The Council armada flew right past them. They did not see a thing. On the other side of the belt, Ji-Wan sat in the cockpit of his command ship and watched the enemy fleet move deeper into human space. He was young, the youngest fleet commander in human history, with messy hair and a scar on his chin from a training accident he never talked about. His hands rested on the controls, steady and still. His communication officer whispered, "Sir, they're past the line." He opened a channel to Admiral Tejo's flagship, the Dangoon, which waited in the shadow of Jupiter. "Admiral, the door is open, and they've walked through." Tejo's voice came back, as calm as always. "Close it." Ji-Wan smiled. He pressed the firing command. Behind the Council armada, the asteroids woke up. 700 human warships powered their engines at the same moment. 3,000 drones launched from hidden platforms inside hollowed rocks. Kinetic kill vehicles shot forward at speeds that broke every known record. Invisible needles of metal and fury aimed at the rear of the enemy formation. The Omari war chief did not understand what was happening for almost 4 full minutes. His sensors showed objects appearing behind him where nothing had been before. His officers shouted conflicting reports. Some said asteroids were moving. Others said the asteroids were ships. Others said both. He tried to turn his fleet around, but 12,000 ships cannot turn quickly. They crashed into each other's communication channels. The 6 species in the Armada used 6 different command languages, and in the confusion, orders got lost, translated wrong, or ignored entirely. The first wave of kinetic kill vehicles hit the rear guard. They were just metal rods, each one no bigger than a person, but they were moving at a fraction of the speed of light. When they struck the Council ships, they did not explode. They simply passed through them, and the ships came apart like paper. Ji-Wan led the second wave himself. His squadron dove into the gaps in the enemy formation, targeting command ships and communication relays. Every move had been planned years in advance. Yuna's intelligence network had mapped the Council's fleet structure down to individual officer rotations. They knew which ships carried the commanders. They knew which ones carried the communication arrays. They knew which ones would panic first. The Fenduel ships tried to coordinate a psychic defense. 3 of their largest vessels linked their minds together and pushed outward, trying to reach into the human crews and fill them with fear and confusion. It was a technique that had broken entire civilizations. It hit the human minds and shattered like glass against a wall. Human minds were chaos, not the organized, structured thoughts that the Fenduel were used to reading, but a roaring storm of emotions, memories, fears, hopes, anger, love, song lyrics, childhood nightmares, and 1,000 other things, all happening at once. The Fenduel recoiled in pain. One of their ships lost navigation and drifted into the path of an Almari cruiser. On the Dangoon, Tejo watched the battle unfold on his display. Red dots were disappearing by the hundreds. He had learned long ago that war was not something to celebrate. But he allowed himself one small moment of satisfaction. He opened a channel to Hana, who was already on her way back to Earth. "The trap worked," he said. "I know," she replied. "How long until it's over?" Tejo looked at the numbers. The Council armada was trying to retreat, but there was nowhere to go. The asteroids behind them had formed a wall. Ji-Wan's squadrons were cutting them apart from the sides. Drone swarms filled every gap. 11 days, he said. Maybe less. Hana was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tell Ji-Wan to accept surrenders. Every single one. No exceptions. Understood. The channel closed. Tejo relayed the order. Across the battlefield, human ships began broadcasting surrender protocols in all 42 council languages. Subin had written the translations herself, making sure each one was polite and clear. Some council ships surrendered immediately. Others fought to the end. The Olmari war chief refused to yield and went down with his flagship, still roaring orders that no one was alive to follow. In 11 days, it was over. The greatest armada the galaxy had ever assembled was gone. Not destroyed entirely, because Hana had ordered mercy wherever possible, but broken so completely that it would take a generation to rebuild. And somewhere in the asteroid belt, Du-Yun took off his glasses, cleaned them on his shirt, and said to no one in particular, "I told them the fuel mixture would work." Hana's office on Earth was a small room with no windows. She had chosen it herself when she returned from the council station, turning down larger spaces with views of the ocean and the mountains. She did not want a view. She wanted walls she could trust and a door she could lock. She sat at her desk now, 3 days into the war, reading reports from the front. Jiwan's forces had broken through the Olmari center line. Tejo was moving the main fleet into position for the final push. Everything was going the way she had planned, down to the hour, down to the minute. Yuna stood across from her, leaning against the wall with her arms folded. She had brought tea, the kind Hana liked, dark and bitter, and 2 cups sat on the desk between them, sending up thin lines of steam. "You haven't slept," Yuna said. "Neither have you. I'm not the one carrying the weight of this." She had known Hana for 30 years, since they were both young officers assigned to the intelligence division. In all that time, she had seen Hana cry exactly once. Hana put down her datapad. She looked at her hands, flat on the desk, and she was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was different, softer, like she was talking to herself. "Do you know what I was thinking when the High Speaker gave his speech?" "Tell me." "I was thinking about the drainage pipe." Yuna said nothing. She knew about the drainage pipe. Everyone in the intelligence service knew, though nobody ever spoke about it. 60 years ago, on a colony world called Ryan 4, there had been a human settlement of 200,000 people. It was a farming colony, nothing special, built in a valley between 2 mountain ranges where the soil was good and the rain came regularly. The people there grew food and raised children and lived simple lives under an alien sky. The council declared the colony unauthorized. The Ravari said the planet fell within Olmari territorial waters, even though the Olmari had never set foot there. A relocation order was issued. The colonists were given 30 days to leave. They could not leave. They did not have enough ships. They sent messages to Earth asking for help, but Earth was far away and its fleet was small. The messages were received, but help did not come in time. The Olmari arrived on day 31. They did not come to relocate anyone. Hana was 8 years old. Tejo was 12. Their parents were farmers who had come to Rion 4 because they wanted more space and clean air and a place where their children could run. Their mother made soup every morning and sang while she worked. Their father taught Tejo how to fix machines and taught Hana how to read star charts for fun. When the Olmari ships appeared in the sky, Hana's father picked her up and ran. He grabbed Tejo with his other hand and pulled them both toward the edge of town where the drainage system ran underground. It was a concrete pipe, wide enough for a child to stand in, but too small for an adult to move comfortably. He pushed both children inside. "Stay here," he said. "Don't come out. Don't make any noise, no matter what you hear." He went back for their mother. He did not come back. Hana and Tejo stayed in that pipe for 3 days. They heard everything. The sounds of the Olmari weapons were deep and heavy. like thunder that came from the ground instead of the sky. The screaming lasted for the first day and most of the second. By the third day, there was only silence and the sound of fires burning. He was 12 years old, and he did not cry, not once, because he had decided that his sister needed him to be strong. He whispered to her in the dark, telling her stories, making up adventures about brave explorers who traveled to distant stars. He told her that one day they would leave this pipe and everything would be different. He was right. Everything was different, but not in the way a 12-year-old boy could have imagined. When rescue ships finally arrived from Earth, they found the colony destroyed. The official count was 200,000 dead. The Council's report called it a regrettable administrative correction and recommended better communication procedures in the future. Hana and Teiho were taken back to Earth. They were placed with relatives. They went to school. They grew up. From the outside, they looked like normal children who had survived something terrible and moved on. They had started planning. Hana entered the diplomatic corps at 19. She was the youngest applicant ever accepted, and her scores were so high that her instructors did not believe them. She climbed through the ranks with a focus and patience that unsettled the people around her. She never raised her voice. She never lost her temper. She smiled politely at every meeting and shook hands with representatives of species that had voted to approve the destruction of her home. Every handshake was a data collection exercise. Every dinner was an intelligence operation. Teiho joined the military the same year. He was quiet and methodical, the kind of officer who read every report twice and memorized the names of every person under his command. He rose to admiral, not because he was aggressive, but because he was careful. The soldiers who served under him trusted him completely, because he never wasted a single life. When Hana was appointed as humanity's ambassador to the Council, she and Teiho sat together the night before she left Earth. They did not talk about the pipe. They never talked about the pipe. Instead, they talked about the plan. The plan was simple. Hana would sit in that small dark seat at the edge of the council chamber, and she would be invisible. She would be polite and quiet and forgettable. She would let every species in the galaxy look at her and see nothing worth worrying about. And behind that invisibility, she would build the most complete intelligence network the galaxy had ever seen. She would learn every secret, every weakness. She would feed the Council carefully chosen pieces of false information that would make them think humanity was divided, underfunded, and afraid. She would make them so confident in their superiority that when they finally decided to attack, they would do it without caution. And then Teiho would be waiting. In her office, Hana picked up her tea and drank. It had gone cold, but she did not seem to notice. 60 years, she said. I sat in that chamber for 23 of them. I smiled at the Rivari High Speaker every single morning. I ate dinner with Olmari generals, and I listened to their war stories, and I laughed at their jokes. She set the cup down. And the whole time, I was counting. I was counting every ship, every weapon, every supply line, every officer's name, every rotation schedule, every communication frequency. I gave it all to you, and you gave it to Teiho, and Teiho gave it to Doyun, and Doyun turned it into the thing that is destroying them right now. Yuna reached across the desk and put her hand over Hana's. Was it worth it? She asked. Hana thought about this for a long time. She thought about her mother's singing, and her father's hands, and a concrete pipe in the dark. She thought about a boy telling stories to keep his sister alive. Ask me when it's over, she said. On the front line, Ji-Wan was fighting. His ship moved through the wreckage of the Council Armada like a knife through water. A captured Fendul officer had been brought to his bridge, shaking and confused, unable to understand how his telepathy had failed against the human crews. How do you function? The Fendul asked, his voice thin and afraid. Your minds are chaos. Every one of you is at war with yourself. Memories fighting thoughts. Emotions fighting logic. Fear fighting hope. It is madness. How do you not collapse? G1 looked at the alien. He was young, but he had the eyes of someone who understood exactly what the Fendul was describing. Yeah, he said. That's the secret. We're used to it. He turned back to his controls and flew into the fight. On the 12th day, it was over. The last Olmari battle group surrendered at the edge of the asteroid belt. Their weapons powered down and their shields dropped. G1's fleet surrounded them in a wide ring, close enough to watch, but far enough to show they were not looking for more blood. The human ships broadcast the surrender protocol in 6 languages on a loop, and one by one, the Olmari captains answered. Across the battlefield, the numbers told a story that the galaxy would not forget. The Council had sent 12,000 warships. Fewer than 4,000 remained. The rest were scattered across millions of kilometers of space as wreckage and silence. On the human side, the losses were small enough to count by name, and Tejo made sure that every name was counted. The war had lasted 11 days. Some species would later argue it was not really a war at all. It was more like a door swinging shut on someone who had walked into the wrong room. On Earth, Hana received the final report in her small office. She read it twice, set it down, and sat quietly for several minutes. Then she stood, put on her gray suit, and told her staff to prepare a ship. She was going back to the Council station. Yuna tried to talk her out of it. Send someone else. Send a message. You don't need to stand in that room again. Yes, I do, Hana said. It has to be me. They need to see my face. Tejo offered to send a full military escort. Hana refused. She took a single diplomatic shuttle with a crew of 4, including Subin, who sat in the back with a translation terminal on her lap, already preparing documents. Subin had been quiet for most of the war. She was always quiet. For 18 years, she had worked as a council liaison officer, sitting in meetings and translating speeches and filing reports that nobody important ever read. She was small and polite and easy to overlook, which was exactly what Yuna had been counting on when she recruited her. During those 18 years, Subin had copied every military encryption key the council used. She had recorded private conversations between admirals and politicians. She had mapped the personal relationships between the most powerful figures in the Accord. All of it was sent to Yuna through channels hidden so deep that even the Fendul telepaths never sensed them, because Subin had trained herself to think about food whenever she passed a Fendul in the hallway. A mind thinking about lunch was not a mind worth reading. Now Subin sat in the shuttle and translated Hana's terms into 42 languages, making sure every word was precise. This was the most important document she would ever write, and she intended to get it right. The shuttle arrived at the council station to find it in a state of panic. The hallways were full of delegates arguing, shouting, and in some cases, physically fighting. The Revari were silent and still, which was their version of terror. The Fendul had retreated into their tanks and refused to communicate with anyone. 3 minor species had already packed their things and left. Hana walked through the chaos without slowing down. She wore no armor, carried no weapons, and had no guards. Subin walked 2 steps behind her, holding the documents. The delegates who saw them stopped talking and pressed against the walls to let them pass. The grand chamber was half empty when Hana entered. Many seats were abandoned. The ones that were still occupied held delegates who looked like they had not slept in days. The Revari High Speaker sat in his central seat, straight and rigid, his black eyes tracking Hana as she crossed the floor. She did not go to humanity's small seat at the edge. She walked to the center of the chamber, to the great podium where only the High Speaker had ever stood, and she stepped up onto it. The room went completely silent. Hana looked out at the remaining delegates. She recognized every face. She had spent decades memorizing them. "I am not here to gloat," she said. Her voice was steady and plain. Subin's translations carried it to every speaker in the chamber. "I am not here to threaten you. I am here to offer you something that none of you ever offered us." She paused. A choice. She held out her hand, and Subin placed the documents in it. Hana set them on the podium where everyone could see. "These are humanity's terms," she said. "They are not negotiable, but they are fair. I will read them once." The chamber waited. First, the Council will formally acknowledge the massacre at Ryan 4, and every other act of violence committed against human civilians under the label of administrative correction. Every name will be recorded. Every death will be recognized. This is not optional. The Revari High Speaker's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Second, the Council will adopt a universal rights accord that protects every species equally, including the ones you have been stepping on for centuries. No more population controls forced on smaller species. No more unauthorized relocations. No more convenient disappearances. A murmur ran through the chamber. Several minor species delegates leaned forward in their seats. Third, humanity will take a permanent seat at the head of this council. Not because we are better than you, but because someone needs to sit there who remembers what it feels like to sit where you put us. Fourth, the council's military will be restructured under joint command. No single species will ever again have the power to send a fleet against a civilian population and call it an administrative matter. Hana folded her hands. That is all. The silence that followed was heavier than any she had experienced in this room. She could see the calculations running behind every pair of eyes. They were expecting conquest. They were expecting humans to carve up the galaxy the way the Revari had carved it up before them. They were expecting to become the small species in the bad seats. The High Speaker stood. His voice was controlled, but something underneath it was shaking. "You destroyed our fleet. You hold our worlds at gunpoint. You could take everything. Territory, resources, our futures." He stared at Hana with those black, reflective eyes. "Why don't you?" Hana met his gaze. She thought about the drainage pipe. She thought about her brother holding her hand. She thought about a 12-year-old boy who decided to be strong because his sister needed him. "Because we are not you," she said. The words landed like a hammer. In the back of the chamber, a delegate from one of the minor species stood up. He was small, from a race called the Duuri, who had been bullied by the Council for longer than humans had been in space. His voice was thin and shaky, but it carried. "We accept the terms," he said. Another minor species delegate stood, then another, then 5 more. Within minutes, a dozen small species that had spent centuries being ignored were on their feet, supporting humanity's terms. They were not doing it because they were afraid of humans. They were doing it because for the first time in their history, someone powerful was offering to protect them instead of use them. The Revari High Speaker watched this happen and understood that the political map of the galaxy had just changed permanently. He sat down slowly, and his silence was his answer. Hana stepped down from the podium. Subin fell into step beside her, and for the first time in 18 years of being invisible, she was walking through the center of the chamber in full view of everyone. "You did well," Hana said quietly. Subin's eyes were wet, but she smiled. "I was just translating." "You were never just translating." They walked out of the chamber together, and the galaxy began to change behind them. 5 years passed, and the galaxy did not look the same. The Universal Rights Accord hung on the wall of every government building on every council world, translated into 400 languages. It was not a suggestion. It was law, and for the first time in the history of the Galactic Accord, It applied equally to everyone, from the largest empire to the smallest colony. Things changed slowly at first, and then all at once. The minor species, the ones who had been stepped on and silenced for centuries, began to speak. The Duori opened trade routes that had been blocked for generations. A species called the Vera, who had been forced to limit their population for 300 years, had their first natural population growth and celebrated with a festival that lasted 2 weeks. The Fenduel, freed from their role as the Council's psychic enforcers, turned their abilities toward medicine and began treating neurological diseases across dozens of worlds. Jiwan commanded the new joint peacekeeping fleet. It was a strange thing, a fleet made up of ships from 20 different species, crewed by officers who had been trying to kill each other 5 years ago. Jiwan handled it the way he handled everything, with a grin and a refusal to take anything too seriously. He had assigned himself an Almari first officer, a massive warrior named Goltar, who had fought in the Battle of the Asteroid Belt on the other side. The first time they met, Goltar had stared down at Jiwan and said, "You destroyed my ship." "Sorry about that," Jiwan had replied. "It was a nice ship." They were friends now. Jiwan taught the Olmari crew human card games during the long patrol shifts. The Olmari were strong, disciplined, and extremely intelligent, but they could not bluff to save their lives. Their faces showed every emotion like a screen showing a movie. Jiwan won every hand, and Goltar accused him of cheating every time, and the human and Olmari crew members laughed together in a way that would have been impossible 5 years ago. Duyun had left the military entirely. He ran a joint science initiative now, working with engineers and researchers from a dozen species to repurpose the technology from Project Ember. The kinetic engines that had powered weaponized asteroids were being redesigned as faster-than-light transport systems. The drone swarm intelligence was being adapted for search and rescue operations. The stealth coding that had hidden an entire fleet was being used to build communication relays in deep space where signals had never reached before. He still wore round glasses and still had ink stains on his fingers, and he still talked to himself when he was working on a problem. His lab was a mess of alien and human technology mixed together on tables and floors, and his team included a Fenduel physicist who communicated entirely through telepathic images, and an Olmari structural engineer who could bend metal with her bare hands. "We built these things to destroy," Do-Yun told a reporter once. "Now we are building them to connect. I prefer this version." Yuna had officially retired from intelligence work. She held no title and had no office. She was, on paper, a private citizen who lived quietly on Earth and tended a small garden. Nobody believed this for a second. In reality, Yuna had restructured her network into something new. Instead of spying on the Council, she now monitored threats from outside the Accord's borders. She tracked pirate movements, flagged potential conflicts between species before they started, and quietly fed information to Jiwan's peacekeeping fleet, so they always arrived before trouble grew too large. She was the immune system of the new galaxy, invisible and essential. Taeho had given up his rank. He left the fleet and moved to Rion 4, which had been rebuilt as a memorial world. The valley where the colony had once stood was now a park, green and quiet, with a long wall of stone on which every name of every person who died was carved. 200,000 names. Taeho walked along that wall every morning, and he knew many of the names by heart. He lived in a small house near the memorial. He grew vegetables. He fixed old machines for his neighbors. Sometimes children from the new settlement came to visit him, and he told them stories, the same kind of stories he had once whispered to his sister, in a dark pipe, to keep her from being afraid. He never talked about the war unless someone asked, and even then he said very little. "We did what we had to do," he would say, and then we stopped. Hana still served on the council. She was the chair of the Accord now, elected not just by the humans, but by 31 other species who trusted her enough to give her the position. She sat at the center of the Grand Chamber, in the seat where the Revari High Speaker had once ruled without question. She did not rule, she led, which was different. She listened more than she spoke. She asked questions instead of giving orders. She made sure that every species, no matter how small, had time to say what they needed to say. The minor species adored her. The major species respected her. The Revari tolerated her, which was their way of showing the closest thing to admiration they were capable of. On a morning 5 years and 3 months after the war, Hana received a report that changed the tone of the room. A new species had been detected at the edge of Accord space. They called themselves the Krath, and they had arrived with a fleet of warships and a simple message: submit or be destroyed. The council chamber erupted into argument. The Elmari wanted to fight. The Fendul wanted to study them. The Revari wanted to negotiate from a position of strength, which meant building more weapons first. Several minor species remembered what it felt like to be threatened by a larger power, and their fear filled the room like cold water. She let them argue, and shout, and wave their arms. She read the intelligence reports that Yuna had already sent her, detailed and precise as always. She looked at the star charts showing the Krath fleet's position. She listened to Jiwan's tactical assessment, which was blunt and confident. We can beat them if we need to. She let the noise die down on its own. Then she stood. Every eye in the chamber turned to her, just as they had turned to her 5 years ago, when she said the word that changed everything. But this time, the eyes were not hostile. They were looking for guidance. They were looking for the person who had taught them, painfully and permanently, that there was a better way to handle things. Before we send ships, Hana said, we send words. Before we show them what we can destroy, we show them who we are. That is what we do first. We talk. The Revari delegate, an older figure who had replaced the former High Speaker, turned to an aide and spoke quietly. The translator picked it up anyway, sending the words through the chamber in a whisper that everyone heard. The humans are the most terrifying species in the galaxy. Not because of what they can destroy, but because they believe talking should come first. And they are right. Hana walked toward the first contact chamber. It was a small room attached to the Grand Chamber, designed for exactly this purpose, but rarely used because most species preferred to meet new civilizations with weapons rather than words. She went alone. She carried no weapon. She wore the same plain gray suit she had always worn. Subin walked beside her to the door and handed her a translation device programmed with every Krath language fragment they had been able to decode. Are you sure about this? Subin asked. Hana looked at her. She thought about the drainage pipe, as she always did at moments like this. She thought about her brother's hand in the dark. She thought about the stories he told her, about brave explorers who traveled to distant stars. She thought about the fact that she had become one of those explorers, not through strength, but through a stubborn refusal to let the galaxy remain as cruel as it had always been. I'm sure, she said. She stepped through the door. It closed behind her. On the other side, the Krath delegation waited, tall and armored and ready for a fight. They were not going to get one, not today. Today they were going to get something much more dangerous than a fight. They were going to get a conversation with a human who had learned, over 60 years of patience and pain and planning, that the most powerful thing in the universe was not a weapon. It was a choice. And Hana had made hers a long time ago.